Good morning, good afternoon. Today we are privileged to have Attorney Mubiru Musoke, who is a member of Uganda Democratic Federation, and he's sending a warning to Museveni, Kaguta Museveni, and the security forces in Uganda that they are liable when they kill protesters in Uganda. He's also going to talk about torture and the Rome Statute. Mr. Mubiru Musoke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Host. The conversation today will focus on liability of the army and police officers when they kill protesters in Uganda. We have laws on those issues to deal with those issues, but these laws are not enforced. Before I go to the subject, let me address Yoweri Kaguta Museveni personally. Suppose one of your policemen tied the hands of your grandson, pulled and dragged him when the people are watching. Suppose that policeman threw your grandson in a grave, shot him in the head, and buried him. Your grandson's accuser arrogated to himself the power of the police, the judge, and the executioner. These three powers are separated in order to guarantee the enforcement of the rule of law. Would you, Museveni, be happy and satisfied with the situation in which there is a total absence of rule of law and fair administration of justice and the punishment of those who violate the laws of Uganda? The inalienable human rights are denied anytime injustice occurs, and there can be no rule of law when police have unlimited power to abuse instead of enforcing the law. I will cite to you another example which you also directly applies to you, Kaguta Museveni. I'm sure that Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, while in Tanzania in 1976, cheered and congratulated the Soweto students when they rioted and protested against apartheid regime in South Africa in order to ensure protection of their inalienable rights. You remember the Soweto riots, I'm sure, and I know that you admired the courage of the Soweto students when they protested and rioted against apartheid. But you don't allow our people to do the same, to enjoy the same rights. Why then did you order, I'm asking you, Museveni, order the police and the army to slaughter hundreds of innocent Baganda in the Bugerere riots and protests in 2009? Those riots and protests were aimed against your repressive policy to deny the Kabaka of Buganda his inalienable right to visit his people in Bugerere. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and cultural rights. All of these three constitute together the International Bill of Rights. Universally, they protect the rights to the rule of law and the right to democracy, which includes the enjoyment of cultural rights and the right to self-determination of the people. These international instruments have been interpreted by Thomas Frank, an eminent international lawyer, to have created the right to democracy, which has recently emerged to protect fundamental human rights of all people to enjoy democratic government. Article 20 and 29 of the 1995 Constitution of Uganda do exactly the same thing, like what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights does. Why did you, in responding to Bugerere riots, when you addressed Parliament in a speech in which you falsely condemned feudalism as the problem in Uganda and Africa as a whole, because feudalism, you argued, allowed European colonialism to take over Africa. You knew that this was false, because in your book, Sowing the Mustard Seed, you pointed out that the reason why colonialism conquered Africa was the technological superiority of the Maxim gun as compared to the African spears. Instead, you falsely condemned feudalism in order to mislead the people of Uganda, why you ruthlessly and slaughtered innocent people to justify your illegal political behavior, violating the people's inalienable rights. Furthermore, that is why when addressing Parliament after Bugerere protests, you regurgitated the same vile language and invalid theories used by your arch political enemy at that time, the late Apollo Milton Obote, in the Common Man's Charter, when he ignorantly, irrationally, and erroneously equated republicanism with the democracy and the presence of feudalism with the absence of democracy. We know, for example, that there are many republics that are not democratic, such republics as Cuba, Somalia, China. And there are many monarchies which are based on democratic principles, such as the United Kingdom, Japan, Sweden, and Denmark. So you cannot tell people lies and equate feudalism with the absence of democracy. Let us look at your deception in greater depth. In order to expose your dictatorship based on political deception and lack of rational political philosophy in a proper perspective, we point out two examples you are closely associated with. First, The NRM Constitution in Article 6 describes NRM as a multi-ideological political organization. Such a claim is equivalent to saying that one can honestly worship and genuinely believe in the existence of a religion based on multiple scriptures. That is, a religion that faithfully worships the religious teachings of Jesus, of Muhammad, of Buddha, and all the Hindu gods. That's impossible. That right there, if you say you are multiple political, your political party, NRM, is a multi-ideological political organization, you are lying, because that is impossible. So projecting NRM as a multi-ideological political party is therefore an obvious exercise in public deception, nothing more. Second, we shall, when we trace the concept of inalienable rights in your past political life as a part of an illustration of your changing political beliefs, dictated by pure political expediency, lying to people just for the convenience of the moment. In the first Uganda resistance news published by the NRA, the bush fighters in the bush, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni wrote in an article with a very enticing title. The title was "The Right of the People to Rebel Against Tyranny." The title of the article you wrote is sufficient to expose your political deception. You have never believed in the right of the people to rebel against tyranny. Otherwise, you wouldn't be shooting people who are innocent and preventing them to hold rallies and to hold peaceful protests. You used the article which you wrote in the Uganda Resistance News to deceive Ugandans that you believe in the protection of inalienable human rights. In the article, you sought to establish the moral justification for the Bush war against the government of Uganda headed by Dr. Apollo Milton Obote. In your article, you argued that certain human rights were inalienable, or which means morally elevated to a higher level of universal protection. Otherwise, there would have been no right for you to rebel against Obote's government. If the government violates inalienable rights, the people have a right to rebel against that tyrannical government and the right to overthrow it. The right to rebel should not apply to Museveni alone fighting Obote. It is a universal right belonging to all people, and in our case, belonging to Ugandans, to rebel against your dictatorship in Uganda. Moreover, it is ironical that the title of the article you wrote in the Resistance News in 1981 was cynically borrowed from the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which warns that, quote, it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by law, unquote. But in Uganda, the laws exist, but they don't protect the rights of the people, as we shall illustrate soon. You constantly violate this Universal Declaration of Human Rights principle in enforcing your repressive policies against Ugandans who want to enjoy liberty. The case of waging war against an illegitimate Obote government was even much easier for you to justify under the guise of rebelling against tyranny. So the rights of Ugandans violated with impunity by your regime also deserve a right to rebel against your government, against your regime. After all, you call it a multi-ideological, which is a deception of the first class. But judging from your political behavior as the leader of Uganda in the past 35 years of your dictatorship, we have concluded that certainly you do not believe in democracy. And I am aware that you know this fact yourself. That is why I'm compelled to remind you about what you wrote almost 40 years ago, telling us that people have a right to rebel against tyranny. When the Ugandans come to protest, when they want to demonstrate, you shoot them and kill them. So where is the right to rebel against tyranny? You should be ashamed of this fact and political deception. Facts are always true, even when they are distorted or misrepresented. We, however, know your true character. You do not genuinely believe in democracy. You should stop pretending and telling people that you are a fighter for democracy. You are a ruthless oppressor of democratic rights. You are a fighter for selfish, personal, corrupt interests to maintain political power at any cost. You have amended the Constitution twice in order to pursue that selfish goal. Age and time limits were put in the 1995 Constitution. Let me remind you about that, and you are aware of that, to ensure peaceful change of government. You, as a dictator, do not believe in peaceful change of leadership if you are likely to lose power. It is therefore our duty to bring your tenure, your political tenure, to an end by all means available to us. Stop misleading people that you went to the bush to fight for restoration of democracy in Uganda. You deceptively used the illegitimate government of Obote to achieve your personal ambitions. You are aware that the 1980 elections were rigged by Mwanga to allow Obote to take over political power fraudulently. This offered you an opportunity to justify your grabbing power from Obote, pretending to be rebelling against tyranny, when in fact you were not rebelling against tyranny. You were fighting just to grab political power and stay with it for the rest of your life. That fact, obviously, does not convert you into a person who believes in democracy. Your bloody political record leaves no doubt that you don't believe in democracy. You were a dictator and not a democratic leader. And you know that. You know this fact to be true yourself. Otherwise, you should have retired from politics a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago. But you haven't. You are still now proposing to run again in 2021. And you tell us that you are not a dictator and you are not addicted to political power. Of course, that the evidence is there, it's clear. We have the evidence to prove our case. At the beginning of the Bush War in 1981, you wrote in the Resistance News, the article I've just quoted, that, let me quote what you wrote. The NRM believes that it is the inalienable right of all people to freely choose their government and to determine the manner of that government. Rigged elections or manipulated elections are an insult to the people, you wrote, and a recipe, you went on to say, for instability, conflict, and upheavals. Constitutions imposed on the people, you wrote, by guise of wire or force cannot be the basis of NRM government to effect a swift but systematic return to democratic government after toppling Obote regime, unquote. All this is a farce. It's not true. You deceived the people. You continue to deceive the people. And this time, because you have the power, you repress the people. You shoot the people. The police is acting illegally, in fact, as we will illustrate. These are historical statements you made, whose meaning you have violated and explicitly repudiated by your political behavior as a leader, not only by rigging elections, you provided over many times, but also by imprisoning opposition leaders, charging them with treason, killing them. Not only that, you have also done worse things than that by concocting, creating crimes which don't exist to accuse your, like a treason, to accuse your political opponents. One of them is, of course, Besigye, and the other one is Tumukunde. And these are these people are just involved in politics, enjoying their inalienable right. And you come up and you say they have committed treason. That is unacceptable. the laws that have been enacted, for example, the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act and the Rome Act, both of which have been domesticated into the laws of Uganda, clearly illustrate what is going on in Uganda, because they are not enforced efficiently, they are not put to use for the purpose they were enacted, as we shall illustrate soon. These laws and the failure to enforce them is a good reflection on your character and dishonesty. You do not believe in this statement we quoted above, which you wrote in the Resistance News in 1981. That is why we are determined to make your regime history. It violates inalienable rights of Ugandans. We discuss the provisions of the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act and the Rome Statute below in order to amplify our points, the points we've made above, that you are engaged in deception rather than in honest leadership. I hope you pay attention to what we are saying now. You may learn something after all before it is too late for you. We believe that the story in Sudan may help you to wake up at last. You need to be woken up politically in order to understand what is going on in the world. You think that Ugandans are political imbeciles who cannot fight for their rights and overthrow a dictator. Well, you can ask Omar al-Bashir. He's in prison today because he wanted, in fact, Bashir was intending to run again the next year, just like you. But for him, he was just running for the third term. He also, by the way, removed term limits from the 2005 constitution of the Sudan. Just like you removed the term limits in the 1995 constitution in 2005. I hope you pay attention to what we are saying today. You may learn something after all before it is too late. We believe that the story in Sudan may help you to wake up, hopefully. In fact, the laws of history are incompatible with dictatorship. That is why dictators are eventually defeated and eliminated. Thank God. There are fewer dictators in the world today than there were, say, 50 years ago. Dictators are mortal human beings, even though they always believe that they are exceptional human beings in history. Saddam Hussein is gone. Muammar Gaddafi is gone. Adolf Hitler is gone. Idi Amin of Uganda is gone. Milton Obote of Uganda is gone. Fidel Castro of Cuba is gone. Omar al-Bashir is gone of Sudan. On the contrary, democratic leaders will live forever. Nelson Mandela will live forever. Abraham Lincoln will live forever. Mahatma Gandhi will live forever. Martin Luther King Jr. will live forever. Yoweri Museveni will never live forever. Let us tell you why. Denial of Ugandans their human rights, inalienable human rights, is the reason why. The laws are designed to protect the inalienable human rights of Ugandans do not exist for dictators. You have refused to enforce them. You daily violate human rights of Ugandans. Let us look at two of these laws directly affecting the protection of inalienable human rights in Uganda. One of the most sensitive issues, which before reaching the deal in Sudan, was the liability of members of the military for the violation of human rights during the protests. It is clear that hundreds of Sudanese were killed by the police and the army during the protests and the riots in Sudan. Were these killings justifiable homicide? Who is to blame and held liable for the violations of human rights during demonstrations, during protests, during riots, and other forms of civil unrest? We must point out that the case of Sudan is very different from that of Uganda. Sudan has never ratified or domesticated the UN Convention Against Torture and the Rome Statute. Uganda, on the other hand, has domesticated both treaties. They are part of the laws of Uganda. They cannot be amended erratically or even repealed as long as Uganda's treaty obligations are in force, since they are international treaties. After ratifying and domesticating these treaties, Uganda has an obligation to enforce them. The Uganda law enforcement officers are required to strictly obey the provisions of the Rome Statute and the UN Convention Against Torture. Recent experience shows that Ugandan army and police officers have violated the Rome Statute and the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act. When that happens, the commanders have to be held liable for their failure to enforce the law or abide by the letter of the law. Under the two treaties, the head of state has a duty to enforce these laws, these treaties. Let us briefly look at the relevant provisions of the two treaties. Torture is a crime in Uganda under the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act, which domesticated the UN Convention Against Torture. Section 4 of the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act provides that a person who performs any act of torture as defined in Section 3 commits an offense and is liable on conviction to imprisonment for 15 years or to a fine of 360 currency points, or both. Under the same section, a person shall not be punished for, and mark this one is a very important part of the provision. It says that a person shall not be punished for disobeying an order to undertake actions amounting to torture, cruel, or inhuman treatment. These provisions mean that police and army commanders have an obligation to refuse to violate the rights of Ugandans, even if they are ordered to do so by the president of Uganda. Treaty obligations are at the same time, same level of the Constitution. Otherwise, they are nothing. Moreover, international law, as spelled out in the 3 international human rights we cited above, regards protection of human rights as the primary duty and purpose of government. So when the government violates these laws, it is not fit to be the government of the people. It is important to point out that prohibition of torture in Uganda is both comprehensive and absolute. But torture goes on all the time in Uganda under Museveni's orders. Section 3 of the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, for example, provides that, quote, there shall be no derogation from the enjoyment of the right to freedom from torture, unquote. The non-derogation of the freedom from torture is also guaranteed by Article 44 of the 1995 Constitution, which is the supreme law of Uganda. Therefore, non-derogation of the freedom from torture is not simply a statutory provision, it's a constitutional provision. More specifically, Section 3 of the Prevention and Punishment of Torture provides that the existence of a state of war or a threat of a state of war, internal political instability, public emergency, or even an order from a superior officer or public authority cannot be used as defenses to a charge of torture. These provisions are clear and very important. They were designed to apply to situations where there is a conflict in the nation, including when the state and government are under attack. They are clearly intended to cover the situation that may exist when people are demonstrating against government. Government policies such as the case in the Sudan between December 2019 and July 2020. That's why the law specifically mentions the conditions when the law is still enforceable. Normally, when there is political instability, public emergency, state of war, and internal political stability, those conditions cannot justify the suspension of the provisions of these laws I'm talking about. It was clear those who enacted these laws, which were originally treaties by the from the UN, they knew what they were doing. They knew they were regimes like the Uganda regime headed by people like Museveni, who would just go out and crush people and claim, oh, there is chaos in Kasese. Therefore, send the army and shoot them. Those situations are not even, don't justify the violation of these laws. So we have, however, been aware that when it comes to the treatment of demonstrators, protesters, and even rioters, the NRM regime has completely ignored these laws. The NRM regime does not believe in the enforcement of human rights laws. When it comes to a political opponents, these laws have been abused by the NRM regime headed by Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. We know, for example, that MPs Kyagulanyi and Zake were severely tortured by both the police and army officers who injected chemicals into their bodies that rendered them unconscious, but nothing was done to the torturers or their superiors, who include Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who are responsible for enforcing the Punishment and Prevention of Torture Act. The situation is likely to change, however, when there is a nationwide protest like that which took place in the Sudan between December and July 2020. The definition of torture is very broad. Torture means any act or omission by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person by or at the instigation of or with the consent and acquiescence of any person, whether a public official or other person acting on behalf or in a private official or private capacity. It is torture if the pain is inflicted for the purpose of obtaining information or confession from a person or other persons, or punishing that person for acting in a certain way, which whoever is enforcing the law believes a person ought to be tortured, which is torture is by itself, as I quoted the definition, is illegal, and there is no justification for it. This plea that we are enforcing laws from above does not apply. When people are protesting nationwide against a specific regime, the situation is different, because in addition to the provisions of Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act, The Rome Statute also applies and has provisions specifically designed to address what official capacity means. Article 27 of the Rome Statute, for example, stipulates directly about the relevance of official capacity, which the Prevention of Punishment of Punishment of Torture Act does not directly address. It provides that this statute, that is the Rome Statute, shall apply equally to all persons without any distinction based on official capacity. In particular, the Rome Statute goes on to provide in Article 27, official capacity as head of state, head of government, or member of government or parliament, an elected representative of a government, official, the official capacity does not make any difference. Secondly, immunities or special procedure rules which may attach to the official capacity of a person, whether under national or international, shall not bar the court from enforcing its jurisdiction over such a person who is claiming to be immune or to be president or to be inspector general. You know what is happening to Kaihura. I don't have to tell you anything more than that, just to remind you. These provisions are important during demonstrations, during protests and riots, such as those that took place in the Sudan. Since the Rome Statute was domesticated, the Uganda courts have jurisdiction to apply the Rome Statute as a domestic law of Uganda. This distinguishes the case of Uganda from what happened in the Sudan. The Sudan situation has to be resolved politically by the transition administration because Sudan has not ratified or domesticated the UN Convention Against Torture and the Rome Statute. Uganda has. The situation in Uganda is further strengthened by Article 28 of the Rome Statute, which provides for the responsibility of the commanders and their superiors. And this one is the one I want to emphasize. In Uganda, the superiors are responsible for any violation of law committed by their subordinates. This means that Museveni is liable for the acts of all the army and police officers at any time below him. The false plea or excuse that law enforcement personnel are simply enforcing superior orders does not apply in Uganda. Under these two treaties, the Rome Statute and the UN Convention Against Torture. Each officer has his commanders and his commander. They are equally liable for any violation of law which is foreseeable and preventable, even if it is not specifically authorized by the commander, by Museveni, for example. Museveni, don't sit there and think, oh, I didn't authorize. Yeah, under the law, you are accountable, you are liable when your subordinate officers violate these laws. More specifically, Article 28 of the Rome Statute provides that in addition to other grounds, criminal responsibility under the statute for crimes within the jurisdiction of the court, a military commander or a person effectively acting as a military commander shall be criminally responsible for crimes within the jurisdiction of the court committed by the forces under his or her effective command and control, or effective authority and control, as the case may be. It is important here to emphasize those two phrases: effective command and control, and effective authority and control. They are describing Museveni's powers. Museveni is always in effective command and control of these subordinate officers. Therefore, he's liable. He's liable when the police on the street violates the rights of either tortures, and torture, as we pointed out, is a non-derogable offense. Museveni is responsible in each case. With respect to superior or subordinate relationship, not described in, for example, the first paragraph A, which I summarized, a superior shall be criminally responsible for crimes within the jurisdiction of the court committed by subordinates under his or her effective authority and control. So that clearly tells us what the law is. I'm going even to laugh at Museveni because he thinks he can amend. These are treaties. They are treaty obligations. We signed those treaty obligations, and you can't just rush tomorrow to Parliament. Of course he can, Museveni being who he is. He can rush to Parliament and say, hey, repeal these laws. Mugiru Musoke says they are dangerous for us. Repeal them. And probably they could, but still the signature is still at the UN, Uganda, ratifying these two treaties. So on April 11, 2020, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, your beloved friend, Dictator Omar al-Bashir, whom you granted asylum, was toppled from power by protesters exercising their inalienable democratic rights. You wrote about in your article in the Resistance News in 1981. The protests used a democratic weapon to communicate with al-Bashir's ruthless regime, which was not different from your regime. The protesters had been protesting against al-Bashir's oppressive regime for many years, as a matter of fact. What Bashir did in Darfur led to his indictment by the International Criminal Court. If you continue behaving like Bashir, you will be. In fact, you should be. The crimes you committed in Kasese are sufficient to indict you for violation of the Rome Statute. And I hope time will come when you will face, like all dictators, the judges in The Hague. You see, the right to protest is very important. It is in human nature. Even slaves in the US, we've read the history, who knew that a rebellion or insurrection was suicidal at one point. They sacrificed their lives in order to ensure a better life for their descendants, who were still slaves. However, genuine freedom fighters like Mandela are not like dictators who are addicted to power and corruption. Unlike you, Museveni, they fight and die for posterity. That's why even slaves, we've seen many slave insurrections in the United States and in Jamaica. They stole their masters' guns and shot them and raped their wives. And they knew that they are going to be killed. So human nature alone has to teach us something. Even slaves committed insurrection and rebellion in order to free, even if they were not freed completely, and they knew the fate that would befall them, they still said enough is enough. And Ugandans, I hope, they've had enough, and they should practice what Museveni has written about in the Resistance News. Rebel against tyranny, a right to rebel against tyranny. Museveni, did you know what you were writing about? Did you understand what you were writing about? If you understood, you would allow people to freely demonstrate on the streets. You would allow people to express themselves, and you would not be so ruthless as to lead them to a rebellion. If you protect their rights, there will be no rebellion. But if you abuse their rights, certainly a rebellion is guaranteed. The brave Sudanese protesters who camped outside the army base in Khartoum managed to force al-Bashir out of power. The same can happen in Uganda. If the Ugandans can force you out, you think because you have guns, you have ruthless thugs that shoot people, that you can survive. I've just told you, it is in human nature. Even slaves who were certain they will be killed if they commit a rebellion. They went forward and did it to protect the rights of their descendants who would come after them. So the same should happen in Uganda. We are not going to be scared of the many guns Museveni has. After all, how many soldiers do you, Museveni, have? Do you have 1 million soldiers? Do you have 1 million policemen? So, if Ugandans are people over 16 years, if you have 25 million of those, certainly 10,000 guns are nothing. And nothing when they rise up, and they have a right to rise up and confront you. And you don't have 1 million bullets either. You can't shoot 1 million people. And so the people, it's a question of determination. I think we are getting there with the determination to throw off our political shackles and liberate ourselves against Museveni. Let me remind you one thing in conclusion. In Sudan, when al-Bashir was overthrown, guess what they found? I know what you read the news. You have a voracious reader of news. I know you. They found $130 million in his residence. Probably you have much more in Rakitula and other places. There were rumors also that actually there were a lot of money in the state house in Entebbe. And whether it is true or not is irrelevant to my point. The point is, not only do dictators repress the people, they also steal from the treasury. And this is common knowledge. So be prepared. Be prepared. I don't think Bashir was prepared, but you should be prepared when we come after you, when we get rid of you. Do you want your sons, the so-called Mohozes and others, to suffer after that? Or do you want, and I bet you don't have the capacity to resign, where you have to be forced to resign, if at all. This brings me to the conclusion of my conversation on the liability of the army and the police officers when they kill protesters in Uganda. The only thing we have to do as Ugandans is to make sure that our rights are protected. And we shall do that, not like Museveni going to the bush and lying all about it and talking about democracy when he's not democratic. We believe in democracy, and we know what democracy means. The first condition for democracy to exist is the rule of law. If it doesn't exist, you can rest assured there will not be democracy. So thank you for listening, and I'll be back with another topic which is relevant to our liberation from the ruthless military leaders of Uganda. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Attorney Mubiru Musoke. for the presentation that has been exceptional. I would also like to thank our attendees for the privilege of their time on Wednesday morning, afternoon, evening, wherever they are. You have really offered and exposed Museveni's hypocrisy. I hope Museveni will listen to this presentation together with his lieutenant and the army and the police who are torturing people, and they should think twice before they torture the MPs, the ordinary people, they kill, they maim, and all that. Thank you very much. We know that regime change in Uganda is inevitable, and what you have contributed today will be useful to the future leaders in Uganda. Again, thank you very much, and we appreciate your time to make these presentations, and we are going to wait for the next presentation you will make that will be announced. On behalf of UDF, I want to thank you again for the excellent presentation.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we don't have time for questions, but Mr. Mbiru Musoko will be coming back another time. And thank you so much again. We are now ending this presentation.